My name is Diana Rowe, 35, and I live in Portland, Oregon. That morning, sunlight poured through my mother's kitchen window, warming the edges of a cream-colored wedding invitation I was holding. I smiled, voice soft and full of excitement. "Mom, I'm so excited for Vicky's wedding tomorrow." My mother froze. The spoon in her hand clinked against the cup, sharp, hollow, final. She looked up, eyes shifting away from mine. "Diana," she said quietly, "the wedding, it was last week." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense. I looked down at the invitation again. Saturday, October 12th tomorrow. A small laugh escaped me, the kind people make when they're too stunned to cry. "You mean, you had it? Without me?" She didn't answer. The kitchen fell into a silence so heavy it almost had a sound, the steady tick of the clock, the faint hum of the fridge, my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. The scent of Earl Grey filled the room as my chest tightened. The wedding of my only sister held in the very house whose roof I'd paid to repair, whose lights I'd hung every Christmas had happened without me. I tried to speak, but the words got lost somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. And in that stillness, I understood. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. They had planned it this way. They didn't forget me, they excluded me. If you've ever been left out by those you call home, you're not alone. Maybe tap that like or subscribe not for me, but for every heart that's ever been forgotten at a family table. When I finally walked out of that kitchen, the sound of the closing door felt like the end of something, not just a morning, but a chapter of my life. As I drove away, the same question looped in my mind. Why would they do this to me? The truth, I think, had been building for years. I'd always been the one to fix things, the bills, the repairs, the emergencies. I thought I was helping out of love. But love doesn't disappear when the work is done. And maybe, when people only call you when they need something, it stops being love and becomes convenience. When my mother said, "It was last week," I finally realized they hadn't erased me that morning. They'd been erasing me slowly, for years. I spent the next few days pretending to function. Work emails, grocery runs, morning walks along the Willamette River, all the little motions that made me look alive. But inside, I felt hollow. Every time my phone buzzed, a small, desperate part of me hoped it was an apology. It never was. Instead, I kept thinking back to the years I'd built my life around theirs, the years I mistook duty for love. 3 years ago, my sister Vicky called me just past midnight. I still remember the tremor in her voice. "Di, please, I'm in trouble. A client backed out of my first big project. I owe 10 grand I don't have." At that time, she was 28, trying to start an interior design business. I'd just gotten my first promotion at the firm, finally earning enough to breathe. I didn't even hesitate. I wired her the money before dawn, whispering to myself that it was what big sisters did. She never mentioned it again, not even a thank you. But I brushed it off. Families don't keep score, right? Then came the summer storm that nearly destroyed our parents' roof. The insurance barely covered half, and Mom called, voice shaking with panic. "If we don't fix it, the house won't make it through winter." $30,000 later, the house was standing strong, and I convinced myself it meant we were closer now, that maybe they finally saw me as more than their fixer. But the closeness never came. That Christmas, Mom said, "We're having a small gathering, Diana. You don't have to come. You're always so busy." I wasn't busy. I just wasn't wanted. I remember standing in the driveway one Thanksgiving, holding a pie I'd baked, only to find the house dark. A text from Vicky came moments later. "We're at the neighbors. Sorry, it was last minute." I sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving home. The pie never left the passenger seat. Looking back now, I think that's when the erasing began quietly, piece by piece. Not through cruelty, but through indifference. And indifference, I've learned, can wound deeper than hate. The irony is that everything they had, I'd helped build. The debt-free house. The business Vicky boasted about to her friends. Even the family vacations, all partly funded by the sister who was too independent, too successful, too much. Sometimes I wonder if that was the problem, that my success made them feel smaller. Mom once said over dinner, "You don't need us, Diana. You've built your own world." I smiled then, thinking it was pride. But now I hear the resentment that hid behind her words. For years, I tried to balance being the reliable daughter and the invisible one. I showed up when they needed help, but never when they celebrated. It was as if my presence belonged only in emergencies, never in joy. That's why the wedding cut so deep. It wasn't just a single betrayal. It was the culmination of 1,000 small ones, moments when I told myself they didn't mean it like that. But deep down, I think they did. When I found out the wedding had happened without me, I didn't just lose a seat at the table, I lost the illusion that I ever had one. I spent nights replaying old memories, trying to pinpoint the moment love turned conditional. Maybe it was the day Vicky asked for that money and forgot my name the second she got it. Maybe it was when Dad stopped calling altogether, letting Mom speak for him. Or maybe it was the moment I stopped saying no and taught them that I didn't have to matter to still be useful. Still, part of me wanted to believe there was more to it, that maybe there was a misunderstanding, something I hadn't seen. But the truth, the real reason behind that exclusion, was about to surface. And when it did, I'd realize this wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was something far worse, something that would make me question not just their love, but their integrity. I thought being forgotten was the worst thing they could do, but I hadn't yet seen what people are capable of when envy and entitlement take root inside a family. The call came 3 nights after I found out about the wedding. I was sitting alone in my condo, the invitation still lying on the coffee table, a cruel relic of what I thought family meant. The city lights flickered outside my window, but inside, everything felt dim. My phone buzzed. It was my cousin Claudia, the only person in the family who'd ever truly seen me. She was older than me by a few years, sharp, honest, a journalist with a habit of cutting straight through pretenses. Her voice was soft but steady. "Diana, I heard what happened." I tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "Yeah, guess I missed the party of the year." Claudia sighed. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but you deserve to know." Something in her tone made me sit up. "Know what?" There was a long pause before she spoke. "They didn't send you the wrong date by accident. Vicky told everyone you were too busy and that she didn't want you stealing her spotlight." For a moment I couldn't speak. The air seemed to thicken. My sister, the one I'd bailed out, encouraged, celebrated, had deliberately erased me. Claudia continued, voice low. "And that's not all. The wedding? It wasn't at some resort like they told people." "Then where?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. "It was at the La Jolla Beach House." The words hit me like a wave. My La Jolla Beach House. The one I'd bought 5 years ago when my parents were drowning in medical debt using nearly all of my savings. I remembered the day I signed those papers. Mom had hugged me tight and said, "You saved us." I let them live there rent-free, thinking it was a gesture of love, a way to keep the family together. And now, they'd turned that gift into a stage from which to erase me completely. I stood up, pacing the room, every nerve burning. "You're sure?" "I am," Claudia said. "I saw the photos before they took them down. Your house, your furniture, your backyard facing the ocean. They didn't even bother to hide it." I pressed a hand to my chest. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it was tangible. They'd used my home, my money, my kindness, to celebrate a life I was never meant to witness. "She said you'd make it about yourself," Claudia added quietly. "She said you'd outshine her." I almost laughed through the tears. Outshine her? I gave her everything she has. There was silence on the line, then Claudia's voice again calm, compassionate. "You don't deserve this, Diana. You've spent years carrying them. Maybe it's time you stop." That night, I didn't sleep. I wandered through my condo, every memory clawing its way back, wiring that $10,000, signing the $30,000 check for the house repair, watching them smile through dinners I paid for. All I ever wanted was to belong. But I'd mistaken usefulness for belonging. They didn't love me, they depended on me. And dependence, I realized, can turn into resentment once you stop needing the person who keeps saving you. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't plan what I'd say. I just needed to see their faces, to look at them and ask how they could do this. Mom answered the door, startled. "Diana, what are you doing here?" I stepped past her, straight into the living room where Dad was reading the paper and Vicky was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Why did you lie to me?" I asked, my voice steady but trembling underneath. They all froze. "About what?" Mom asked too quickly. "The wedding," I said. "The invitation. The date. And the house." Vicky's eyes snapped up, narrowing. "Oh God, Claudia told you her tone wasn't guilty." It was annoyed. "So it's true," I said quietly. Vicky leaned back, crossing her arms. "You always make everything about you, Diana." This was my day. I didn't want your big job, your big attitude, your pity overshadowing it. I felt my jaw tighten. Your big day? In my house? Mom flinched. Dad set down his coffee but didn't look up. "Don't start," Mom said softly. "We didn't think it would matter." "You were busy." "Busy?" I snapped. "I was working to pay for the roof over your heads." "The roof you celebrated under while pretending I didn't exist." The silence that followed was unbearable. For the first time in years, I saw them clearly not as my family, but as people who had mistaken my love for an endless supply line. And maybe that's what I'd allowed them to believe. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I simply said, "You used me and you lied to me." "That's not love. That's theft with manners," Vicky scoffed. "You're being dramatic." But Mom looked away. Dad kept his eyes on the floor. That was the moment I knew they didn't feel sorry. They felt exposed. I turned toward the door, my voice steady. "You've built your lives on my generosity. That ends today." As I walked out, Vicky called after me, her voice sharp and mocking. "What are you gonna do, sue us?" I didn't answer. Because I already knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to scream or plead or beg them to love me. I was going to take back everything they'd taken for granted, not out of revenge, but out of survival. That day, standing on their porch, the morning air biting at my skin, I made a silent vow. They might have erased me from their story, but I would write mine, and this time, I'd make sure they couldn't touch a single page of it. The drive home from my parents' house felt longer than it should have. Portland's skyline glimmered in the distance, but I saw none of it. My hands stayed tight on the steering wheel, my mind caught between heartbreak and clarity. For years, I'd built my life around them, saving, fixing, providing, thinking it made me a good daughter. But that morning, standing in their living room, I realized something I never had before. Good daughters can still be used. When I reached my condo, I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I walked straight to my study, pulled out the thick blue folder marked La Jolla Property, and laid it open across my desk. Deeds, purchase contracts, bank transfers. Every document with my name printed, clearly proof that the beach house, the one they'd used for the wedding, belonged to me. That house wasn't just an asset. It was the symbol of every late night I'd worked, every vacation I'd skipped, every dollar I'd saved. I'd given it to them as a home. They turned it into a prop for my exclusion. My phone rang Claudia again. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I'm done crying," I said. "Now I'm thinking." There was a pause. "Thinking about what?" "About how people only change when you stop enabling them." She was silent for a moment, then said, "If you need help, I know someone. A lawyer. She's sharp. Fair." That's how I met Linda Morse. She arrived the next morning at my office, early 40s, composed with a calm confidence that filled the room before she even spoke. Her handshake was firm, her tone direct. "I've reviewed what Claudia sent," she said, flipping through the documents. "You bought that property outright. No liens, no joint names. It's yours, legally and completely." I nodded, a knot tightening in my throat. "They've been living there rent-free for years." Linda looked up. "Then it's time they learn what that actually costs." Her words weren't cruel, they were steady, matter of fact, and for the first time in weeks I felt grounded. We spent the next 2 hours going through every paper, title deeds, tax records, wire receipts. Linda's pen tapped rhythmically as she took notes. "They've been using it as their primary address," she said finally. "That means, by law, they're tenants at best." I stared at her. "Tenants?" "Yes," she replied, "and tenants don't get to host weddings in a landlord's house without permission." A laugh slipped out, not of humor, but disbelief. "They turned my home into a wedding venue," I murmured. Linda closed the folder. "I can file a notice of ownership assertion and a cease-use letter today. You don't have to evict them yet, but this draws the line. They'll know you're serious." I hesitated. "It feels harsh." She studied me quietly. "Diana, kindness isn't weakness, but letting people exploit it is. You're not punishing them. You're enforcing boundaries they never respected." Her words lingered long after she left. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the city fade into twilight. For the first time in my life, I felt something unfamiliar power without guilt. My phone buzzed. A text from Vicky. "You didn't have to embarrass Mom like that today. We were just trying to celebrate." I stared at the message, a mixture of rage and pity rising in me. She truly didn't understand. Or maybe she did, and this was her way of deflecting blame. "You celebrated with everything I gave you," I typed back. "Enjoy it while it lasts." I didn't send it. I deleted it instead. Silence, I decided, would speak louder. The next day, Linda sent me copies of the letters she'd filed. Her efficiency was almost surgical. When I opened the envelope, I felt an unexpected calm wash over me. For once, I wasn't reacting, I was deciding. I wasn't storming out, shouting, or seeking apologies that would never come. I was simply drawing a line. Claudia called that evening, her voice warm with pride. "You sound different," she said. "I am," I replied. "For the first time, I don't feel like a daughter trying to prove her worth. I feel like a woman reclaiming what's hers." She laughed softly. "That's the Diana I always knew was hiding under all that loyalty." When the call ended, I walked to my balcony. The night breeze carried the faint hum of the city, distant and forgiving. Below, streetlights shimmered like constellations. I thought about my family, my mother's averted eyes, my father's silence, Vicky's defiance. They'd built their comfort on my sacrifices, but comfort built on deceit never lasts. And as I stood there, one quiet truth settled in. I wasn't their savior anymore, and I didn't need to be their victim either. I'd been erased from their story, yes, but maybe that was the only way I could finally start writing my own. The paperwork was just the beginning. Tomorrow I'd go to the La Jolla house myself, not to fight, not to plead, but to really see what love had turned into after years of taking without giving. And that would be the day my silence ended, not with words, but with action. The drive to La Jolla took 6 hours. I left Portland before sunrise, the roads still quiet, the sky washed in that soft, uncertain gray between night and morning. I hadn't been to the beach house in almost 2 years, the place that once meant family, now haunted by the echo of a wedding I wasn't invited to. As I pulled into the long driveway, a strange calm settled over me. The house looked the same: white walls, blue shutters, the faint scent of salt carried by the wind. But beneath its beauty, something felt different, colder. I stepped out of the car, my heels crunching on gravel. The front door was unlocked. Inside, flower petals still clung to the floorboards. The faint outline of a rented arch stood on the deck. They hadn't even cleaned up properly after their celebration. In the living room, I found a half-burned candle engraved with Vicky's initials. My initials used to be the only ones that mattered here on the deed, on the bills, on the mortgage I'd paid alone. I ran my fingers across the window pane, the same one I'd helped Mom decorate the first Christmas after they moved in. Back then, it had felt like home. Now it felt like proof. Proof that love without respect turns everything it touches into something hollow. A car pulled up behind me. It was Linda, ever punctual, a stack of documents in hand. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded. "More than I've ever been." She handed me a clipboard. "These are ownership assertion papers. I'll file them with the county today. Once posted, they'll have 30 days to vacate or contest." I signed without hesitation. My signature came out smooth, almost serene. I thought it might feel vengeful. Instead, it felt freeing. Linda watched me, her expression softening. "You know, most people break when family betrays them like this." I smiled faintly. Maybe I did. Just not in the way they expected. We walked through the house together. The photographs were gone, the walls bare where once there had been family portraits. They'd stripped the place of sentiment, leaving only the shell of what we used to be. On the kitchen counter, I found a small stack of unpaid bills, electricity, landscaping, cleaning services, all in my name. My chest tightened. "They didn't just use me," I murmured. "They built their lives on the assumption that I'd never say no." Linda placed a hand on my shoulder. "And today? You finally did." I nodded, glancing toward the ocean through the sliding doors. The tide was coming in steady, unhurried, unstoppable. I thought about my father's silence, my mother's excuses, Vicky's arrogance. All those years I'd kept hoping they'd see my worth, but maybe being unseen was what forced me to finally see myself. We stood on the deck for a while, the wind whipping through our hair, the horizon stretching endless before us. The papers in my hand fluttered, their sound sharp and rhythmic, like applause from the universe itself. When Linda left, I stayed a little longer. I sat on the old wooden bench overlooking the sea, the same spot where I once dreamed of family barbecues and summer laughter. Instead, I found something better, peace. I took a slow breath and whispered to the waves, "You can't steal what I've already reclaimed." The sun dipped lower, painting the water gold. I gathered the papers, locked the door behind me, and walked back to my car. As I turned the key, I looked at the house one last time, not with bitterness but gratitude, because that was the day I stopped fighting for a family that didn't fight for me. And for the first time in years, the woman staring back at me in the rearview mirror didn't look erased. She looked whole. 6 months have passed since that day at the beach house. Sometimes I still wake up expecting a message, an apology, an explanation, anything, but none ever comes. And strangely, I'm at peace with that. My life feels quieter now, but not empty, just honest. The noise of expectation is gone, replaced by the steady rhythm of a life I finally own. My work has flourished, my circle has grown smaller but truer. And every morning, when sunlight filters through my kitchen window, I think, this is what peace sounds like. I visit La Jolla sometimes. The house is rented now, managed by a company that sends me neat monthly reports. It no longer feels like a wound, more like a scar that doesn't ache anymore. When I walk along the shore, the wind off the Pacific carries no bitterness, only a quiet kind of forgiveness. I never did hear from Vicky again. Claudia told me their business failed, that my parents moved into a smaller place. I didn't celebrate it, I just let it be. Life has a way of teaching lessons we refuse to learn ourselves. One afternoon, standing on the deck, I realized something simple. All my life, I'd been waiting for my family to see me. But healing began the moment I stopped needing them to. I leaned on the railing, the ocean stretching endlessly ahead, and whispered, "You can lose everything you gave and still keep who you are." Because that's the truth I wish someone had told me years ago. Love given freely is never wasted. But when it's taken for granted, you have the right to take yourself back. If you've ever had to walk away from people you still love, I know how heavy that feels. But sometimes, letting go isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. And if this story found you tonight, leave a heart, share a thought, or simply stay a while. Maybe someone else out there needs to remember, being forgotten doesn't mean you stop mattering, because the day I chose myself, I didn't lose my family. I simply stopped losing me.